Assalamu alaikum. We'll start with the recitation of the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير وآتينا موسى الكتاب وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل ألا تتخذوا من دوني وكيلا ذرية من حملنا مع نوح إنه كان عبدا شكورا وقضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرة ولتعلن علوا كبيرا صدق الله العظيم. So, as many of you guys know, this is Brother Daniel Haqiqatjou. He graduated from Harvard, and he has a YouTube channel called The Muslim Skeptic. He also wrote a book called The Modern Menace. I think it's like one of the most selling on Amazon, right? And yeah, I think a lot of people like him, a lot of people hate him, but so inshallah he'll give us the talk. And if you have any questions, just give me a Q&A at the end.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much to MSA for inviting me, and thank you to the University Administration for not canceling the event and providing us with security. Really appreciate that. Originally, this event was supposed to be a discussion and dialogue between a Muslim and a Jewish, either chaplain or intellectual. But unfortunately, that didn't pan out. I would have preferred to have more of a dialogue, but since it's just going to be me, I'll have a presentation. It should take about 45 minutes to an hour, inshallah, and then there'll be Q&A. And I hope that in the Q&A, we can have our Jewish neighbors ask questions, gain clarification, challenge me. That is more than welcomed. So the title of this talk is Hate and Racism in Judaism and How It Generates Israeli War Crimes. Before we get into some of the substantive points about the Jewish religion, I just want to note, the horrifying genocide that's taking place as we speak against the Palestinians. And when we look at what even non-Palestinian, non-Muslim organizations say, like Oxfam International, one of these major charitable organizations internationally, they say that the daily death rate in Gaza is higher than any other major 21st century conflict. The Israeli military is killing 250 Palestinians per day, with many more lives at risk from hunger, disease, and cold. Also, we know about the ICJ ruling, the International Criminal Court of Justice, that finds that genocide is taking place plausibly in Palestine at the hands of Israel. And it orders Israel to stop these genocidal violations and the war crimes. Just today, there was a massacre of Palestinians by the IDF. Palestinians who are going to get aid because they are being starved to death by Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid, blockade of UN aid, United Nations aid. They are starving to death, women, children. And there was some aid that was there, and as Palestinians approached it, they were shot and killed. Over 100 have been killed, 750 wounded. This is a massacre of civilians. And this was reported in many places. I think 100 killed, that's actually a lower estimate. A quarter of Gaza's population is one step from famine, and aid trucks are being blocked, they're being looted, And this is what the UN is saying. So basically, Israel has decided that, okay, we have killed over 30,000 Palestinians. We have slaughtered over 10,000 Palestinian children. But these Palestinians are so stubborn. They're not leaving. They're not leaving and vacating Gaza. Our forced expulsion hasn't worked so far, so let's just starve them to death. Let's just starve them to death, and maybe then they'll evacuate and we can take over this land. And I think the calculation that Israel is making is that we have lost so much public trust. We have burned so many bridges in this war. We cannot salvage our public image. So the only way that we can not lose is if we completely vacate and ethnically cleanse Gaza, take it over and settle it. That's the only way we can break even. And anything less than that is going to be a defeat, because we can't defeat Hamas. We have not met any of these objectives that we've had in taking out Hamas. So the only thing that we can really salvage is to take over the Gaza Strip. And how do we do that? Well, we've bombed them to smithereens, killed over 30,000, but starvation is the next move. So this is why they have no shame in actually targeting hungry children going to aid trucks. I think more than what these statistics can convey are images. When we see IDF soldiers who are gleefully playing with Palestinian children's toys, they're going to the remains, basically playing on the graves of Palestinian women, children, and non-combatants. Look at the smile on this IDF soldier's face as he plays with his bike. Look at these IDF soldiers playing with a doll. Palestinian child's doll. It's probably been killed or made into a refugee, probably lost most of its family members, his or her family members. They're just having fun, taking a photo shoot, posting it on Instagram. So absolutely no shame. And this basically reveals the lie that Israel is not engaged in genocidal acts. Israel is not engaged in ethnic cleansing. They clearly are. They clearly are. Here you have another happy IDF soldier. Look how much fun he's having. Look, these are the toys of 2-year-old, 3-year-olds with their assault rifles sitting on these children's bikes. Like, what is the explanation for this? We're often given the lie that, the operation is just meant to defeat Hamas. We have no problem with the Palestinians at large. Then how do you explain this? And these aren't just random soldiers. Some of these are lieutenants, they're sergeants, they're high officers within the IDF. This kind of behavior is completely allowed. And they have no shame. They have no shame about this. Here is an IDF soldier posing in a crib. A child's literally a crib. Who can explain this? Who can justify this? And then you get into these kinds of horrifying images where the soldiers, these are special forces, by the way, holding up the lingerie and the intimate apparel of Palestinian women. How can you justify this? This is like a big joke to them. So this is shocking. This is shocking. And never have we seen a genocide take place like this that's been documented in 4K because of phone camera technology, because of wireless technology. Everything is being documented. And the usual hasbara, the Israeli propaganda, it's not effective anymore. They haven't adapted, basically. The Israeli Zionist think tanks that come up with the propaganda to say things like, Palestinians use human shields, or Hamas is, doing this or that. They can't they can't explain away this 4K imagery, footage. Social media has destroyed the Israeli hasbara narrative. And this has become a huge crisis for Israeli PR, Zionist PR. Here was a TikTok video of an IDF lieutenant, I believe, and he's taken some Palestinian high heel shoes and says, here's a pair of high heels for our engagement party. So he's a soldier who's getting engaged. He's stealing the shoes of Palestinians, women, a woman that he has killed or has been killed or displaced. So what is the point of my talk in a nutshell? It's often claimed by Zionists that what causes Palestinians to quote-unquote hate the Jews or to hate Israel is because of Islam. Islam is a hateful religion. Islam advocates violence. Islam advocates terrorism. All of this kind of propaganda that's been spread about Muslims for 20 years, the better part of 20 years in terms of the war on terror, but even beyond that, prior to the past 20 years. All of this propaganda against Islam, attacking Muslims, calling Muslims the supporters of violence and hate, and all of this attention has been placed on Muslims and created all kinds of negative consequences for Muslims. Muslims have suffered from Islamophobia, from discrimination, from hate crimes because of all of this negative propaganda against Islam and Muslims, much of it perpetrated by Zionists and Zionist organizations. The Islamophobia network is funded in large part by Zionist organizations, whether they're fundamentalist Christian Zionists or they're Jewish Zionists. So this claim is made about Islam, and there's been this focus and analysis on Islam. What does Islam actually teach as an explanation in a longer narrative that Islam advocates violence and hate? But what if we turn the tables for at least one talk at a university? What does the Jewish religion teach? What do we find within Jewish texts? What do we find advocated within the main scriptures of the Jewish religion that many Jews, not only in Israel but in America, are devoutly obedient to and believe in the strongest terms? Let's look at some of these texts and we'll see that the Jewish religious tradition is a primary cause, if not the primary cause of this conflict. So it's going to be claimed, it's already been claimed that I spread hate because I'm coming here and I'm criticizing Israel. So that means I'm an anti-Semite, just by virtue of me arguing against genocide and the killing of Palestinian women and children. But let's look at what the teachings of Judaism actually are. Could we say that the teachings of Judaism cause hatred of others? So, racial superiority is one of the main, or a very significant teaching within the Jewish religious texts. And I should give the disclaimer that not all Jews believe in these texts. Not all Jews believe in the racial superiority of the Jewish race. But it is something that is found in Judaism. It is something that has been advocated and taught by the most authoritative figures of religious authorities within the Jewish tradition. But I have to give that disclaimer because there are Jews who fight against this kind of racial supremacy. There are Jews who will actually support the Palestinians against genocide. So I just have to make that disclaimer. So here are 4 points that you will find throughout, or 4 themes that you'll find throughout Jewish texts. Jews are God's chosen race. Jews are the only real human beings. Jews are semi-divine, as their souls are divine. Jews are the most moral group in the world due to their adherence to the Torah. So what is the evidence for this? These might be shocking claims for those of you who are not familiar with Jewish religious texts. So if we go to the Hebrew Bible in Deuteronomy chapter 7, we'll read, "For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth." So this becomes the basis for a racial supremacy, because the Jewish people, by virtue of the covenant between God and Abraham, the prophet Abraham, are special by virtue of their lineage, biological lineage. So this is a racial supremacy. If we go to the Talmud, Bava Metzia 114b, we read, "Jewish people are called man, but Gentiles, meaning non-Jews, are not called man." So this is a racial distinction between Jews and non-Jews. When we go to the Jerusalem Talmud, in the Kiddushin, it says, "Kill the best of Gentiles, smash the head of the best of snakes." So non-Jews are compared to snakes, vile creatures that should be killed. when we look into the specifics of Talmudic purity laws, so for Muslims we have the laws of tahara, purity, making wudu, making ghusl, washing, what kind of waters can be used. Well, in Judaism there's also a vast literature on taharat, or tahara in Arabic, meaning purity. And in those examples you find many of the application of this idea that Jews are the only real humans, non-Jews are not human. So here we read in the Bava Metzia, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, "The graves of Gentiles do not render one impure, as it stated, 'And you, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, are man,' which teaches that you, i.e. the Jewish people, are called man, but Gentiles are not called man." So there's a rule within the Talmud that if you are in the graveyard of men, then that you become impure because of that. So the question arises, what if you go into the graveyard of non-Jews? Do you become impure, ritually impure, by going to the graveyard of non-Jews? And the answer is no, because they're not really men. These are not the dead bodies of men, these are the dead bodies of non-men, or even animals. And the comparison is made to animals throughout the Talmud. So when people see these verses, or rather these passages of the Talmud is one of the most important religious scriptures within Judaism. But modern Jews are very embarrassed by these kinds of passages that compare non-Jews to animals or to snakes. So they have apologetics, and they say, here's an example tweet, that the Talmud isn't the word of God, that's the Torah, meaning the Hebrew Bible. The Talmud is meant to be debated. It's merely interpretations by men, not God. But this is false. The Talmud is considered the oral Torah that was revealed to Moses at the same time that the written Torah was revealed. So the Talmud is based on the oral Torah, which they consider to be the revelation of God. The rabbis in the Talmud are believed to also speak on the basis of supernatural knowledge transmitted to them from Moses. So when the rabbis are debating in the Talmud, this is not just some random rabbi who's giving his opinion. In the Talmud, this is actually believed to be representing the speech of God as has come to Moses, as has come to the rabbis. So just like in Islam, we have the concept of isnad or sanad, that there's a chain of transmission. Jews believe that as well, religious Jews, when it comes to the Talmud, that this has been transmitted from rabbi to rabbi over thousands of years. Of course, Muslims do have like a record of the actual transmission. There's not a robust record of sanad, so to speak, within the Jewish tradition, but that's at least the claim. Talmudic rabbis are also sometimes known to hear the voice from heaven, bat kol, what's called the bat kol. So this is also represented in the Talmud. It's not just the random opinions of men. Rabbis also can get knowledge by ascending to heaven. So when the claim is made that the Talmud is man-made, in the sense that it is written by rabbis, or it's the recorded opinions of rabbis, yes, that's true in a sense, but the Jewish belief is that the voice of the rabbis and the opinion of the rabbis are more authoritative than the voice of God himself. The voice of the rabbis are actually more authoritative than the voice of God. And this is the doctrine of the Torah is not in heaven, and it's also related in the Talmud, in the story of oven of Achnai. And for lack of time, we won't be able to go through all the details of that. But this is similar to what Islam and what the Quran notes about Judaism. And in the Quran we read, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. They've taken their rabbis and their monks as lords besides Allah. And this is actually in the religion. This is actually within Judaism, that the opinion of rabbis are considered to be more authoritative than even the word of God. So arguably, the Talmud is more important as a religious text than the Torah itself. Even if we weren't looking at the Talmud, we have other authoritative religious texts that we can look at, which are For example, the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides. Maimonides is considered to be the greatest scholar, legal scholar of the Talmud, or the Torah rather. And he is considered the greatest rabbi basically in terms of theological and legal reasoning. And this is what Maimonides says. Now, try to understand this passage. I'll try to explain it, but he says in the Mishnah Torah, if a Jewish male enters into relations with a Gentile woman, when he does so intentionally, she should be executed. She is executed because she caused a Jew to be involved in an unseemly transgression, as is the law with regard to an animal. So basically, the law with regard to an animal within Judaism is that the animal, if there's an act of bestiality, when a man has some kind of sexual relation with an animal, the animal is killed. So the relation between a Jewish male and a non-Jewish female is analogous. According to Maimonides, the female, meaning the woman, should be executed. And then he says, what's even more shocking than that? This applies regardless of whether the Gentile woman was a minor of 3 years of age or an adult, whether she was single or married, and it applies even if the Jew was a minor of 9 years old. She is executed. So even a 3-year-old is raped, that 3-year-old should be put to death because this is basically analogous to bestiality. Now, Maimonides has written this. Obviously, I know that most Jews today would completely denounce the idea here, but I don't hear much denunciation of Maimonides. I don't hear much denunciation of Maimonides, and when I presented this passage in a debate context, and I've asked it for my interlocutor to denounce the passage, they've refused. They've refused to denounce Maimonides. Why? Because Maimonides is the greatest legal scholar of the Torah. If you denounce Maimonides, you basically denounce the entire rabbinic Jewish tradition. So, but this passage is there, and you can, if you want to get the exact website on the Jewish yeshiva source for this passage, I'll be happy to provide that as well. So what about racism? We see this concept of racial supremacy, how non-Jews are not considered to even be human. But what about just racism? We see anti-black racism within the Jewish scriptures. So Jewish scriptures denigrate all non-Jews as subhuman, but they single out blacks for special insult, and they use the word kushi. Anti-black racism is clearly expressed in the Talmud. One key passage explains that Noah's son Ham committed a sin on the ark, and for this reason, him and his descendants are cursed with having black skin. This is known as the curse of Ham. All blacks are considered to be descendants of this son of Noah, who was named Ham. So in the Sanhedrin 108b in the Talmud, the sages taught 3 violated that directive and engaged in intercourse while on the ark, and all of them were punished for doing so. They are the dog and the raven and Ham, son of Noah. The dog was punished in that it's bound. The raven was punished in that it spits. And Ham was afflicted in that his skin turned black. This is the punishment for his violation of Noah's ark. Other classical Jewish texts offer further details. It's asserted that blacks are descended from Canaan and the son Ham. And there are many curses associated with being part of this lineage. Black skin, being ugly, you're meant to serve as slaves for other people. These are all found within the Talmud and other midrash, which are authoritative Jewish texts. It's also claimed that the lineage of blacks is associated with bestiality and they have sex with dogs. So within the Talmud we read, concerning the Kushi, the Gihor, the Lavkan, the Kapei, the dwarf, the deaf-mute, the imbecile, the drunk, and those with ritually pure marks, their conditions disqualify them from performing temple service. So not only are they cursed with ugliness and black skin, but they also cannot serve in certain roles within Jewish ritual. This is coming straight from the Talmud. You also find this racism expressed by modern rabbis. So there's a huge controversy because it came on record that the chief rabbi of Israel was calling African Americans monkeys. So this is not just some random rabbi fringe element. This is the chief rabbi of Israel, and there was a huge controversy when this came out. There was also a huge controversy when it was discovered that Ethiopian women in Israel were being given contraceptive without consent. So you have Ethiopian women, black women coming from Ethiopia that are trying to resettle in Israel. And they're Jewish as well. They're Jewish Ethiopian women and families. And the Israeli health ministry was giving them these jabs, which was sterilizing them, basically sterilizing these Ethiopian women. And it wasn't discovered that this was happening until outside groups and social workers discovered that the birth rate for Ethiopian immigrants were cut in half over a decade. And there was an Israeli documentary that was presenting all this, and it caused a huge popular outcry. So imagine that. You have forced sterilization for blacks in Israel. The Israeli health ministry is behind it. And we are supposed to consider Israel to be the only democracy in the Middle East. But the racism found within Jewish texts are not just directed against blacks. There's also anti-Arab racism. So in the Talmud we read, the sages in the school of Rav say there are 4 creations that the Holy One, blessed be He, created, yet as it were, He regrets that He created them, as they do more harm than good. And these are exile, Chaldeans, Ishmaelites, and the evil inclination. So these are 4 creations of God, but God regrets them because they do more harm than good. So the Ishmaelites, who are the Ishmaelites? Ishmaelites, as it's written, the tents of robbers prosper, and they that provoke God are secure in whatsoever God brings with His hand. God brought upon Himself these Arabs that dwell in the deserts in tents. So this is how Ishmaelites are defined in the Talmud. So I'm getting the indication that we have to take a break to pray for Maghrib. Let me just finish this section, and then we'll go. We also see in another book or tractate in the Talmud, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said to Levi, show me Persians, meaning describe a typical Persian to me. Levi said to him, they're similar to the legions of the house of David. Rabbi Yehuda said, show me Habbarim, Persian priests. Levi said to him, they're similar to angels of destruction. Rabbi Yehuda said, show me Ishmaelites, meaning Arabs. Levi said to him, they're similar to demons of an outhouse. Rabbi Yehuda said, show me Torah scholars of Babylonia. Levi said to him, they're similar to ministering angels. So there's kind of like a racial hierarchy here. Jews are at the top. Then Persians. Persians are like bad angels. And then you have the Ishmaelites, and they're demons. The Arabs, they're at the bottom of the totem pole. And maybe blacks are below that. So this is the racial hierarchy presented within this passage of the Talmud. And again, we see this is not, so you might say that, Daniel is just reading these passages out of context. He's just cherry picking these things to give Judaism a bad name. But no Jew actually believes in these kinds of things. But again, you see very authoritative Jewish rabbis, teachers who are teaching at some of the highest yeshivas, meaning religious schools within Israel, who are repeating these ideas. And there is a big controversy at one particular school known as B'nai David. B'nai David is a yeshiva. Basically, it's like a finishing school. After Israeli high school students graduate, they go to these academies in preparation for their mandatory service in the IDF. And these academies have religious instruction. And some of the audio from one of the top academies, B'nai David, was leaked. And you have all of these despicable racist statements coming from these teachers. And again, B'nai David, to give you a sense of the significance, just in January, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, was giving speeches at B'nai David. He gives speeches at this school, and the teachers at this school are teaching things like the following. They're praising Hitler. They're urging enslavement of non-Jews. So one of the teachers there, Rabbi Eliezer Keshtiel, says, the Gentiles will want to be our slaves. Being a slave to a Jew is the best. They're glad to be slaves. They want to be slaves. Instead of just walking the streets and being stupid and violent and harming each other, once they're slaves, their lives can begin to take shape. All around us, we're surrounded by peoples with genetic problems. Ask a simple Arab, where do you want to be? He wants to be under the occupation. Why? Because they have genetic problems. They don't know how to run a country. They don't know how to do anything. Look at them. And then to clarify, just in case you were confused if that was racist enough, he says, yes, we're racists. We believe in racism. There are races in the world and people have genetic traits, and that requires us to try to help them. The Jews are a more successful race. So again, this is not some random nobody saying this. This is one of the rabbi instructors at a top academy within Israel. And this is the type of hate that is being taught. So when you see an Israeli soldier, IDF, playing with children's dolls of Palestinians that they just got finished massacring, that doesn't happen overnight. That is through socialization. That is through a long process of indoctrination, imbibing that hate against non-Jews. And again, and it's not only these random rabbis in Israel. You also have major Jewish Zionist figures like Ben Shapiro who echo these very same sentiments. When Ben Shapiro tweets that Israelis build, but Arabs blow stuff up and live in their own sewage, when he tweets that to the world, he has no shame. Like, what makes him even think in such a racial way, in such a racist way, to denigrate Arabs, 500 million people in the entire world, as being just violent, irrational terrorists who blow things up and live in sewage like rats? How does that occur to Ben Shapiro, who's supposed to be such a shining example of Jewish intellectual sophistication? This is shocking. It should be shocking, but unfortunately, these issues are not openly discussed. And the thing about this type of racism is that it affects the entire culture. It doesn't just stay within the yeshivas and stay within the synagogues. The scripture affects the Jewish tradition and therefore affects Jewish culture. Therefore, you see non-religious Jews who will say, I'm not committed to the Talmud, I'm not a Torah-abiding Jew, still will express extreme racism. And there is an example of an Israeli lawmaker who proclaimed the supremacy of the Jewish race. Jews just have higher IQ. Jews are just more successful. We are in this position to occupy and to control Arabs because they are inferior. And he's not you can tell he's not an Orthodox Jew. The semi-divinity of Jews. So this is something that is also very important. I recommend reading this article. You can find it online. The differences between the Jews and the Gentiles in the Agadah, the Kabbalah, and in Jewish thought. You can also read the book, an academic book titled Jewish Fundamentalism in Israel by Israel Shahak and Norton Mesvinsky. And this is a book that discusses the views of a very influential rabbi, Menachem Schneerson, who died in 1994 and is considered the most influential, one of the most influential, if not the most influential Jewish religious figure in the 20th century. So Rabbi Schneerson, here he is. Here's a picture of him. And he's very significant, especially here in Queens. His grave is, just around the corner in Cambria Heights. And many Jews consider it to be a pilgrimage site. They come to see his grave site. But what did he think about Jews versus non-Jews? This is, quite interesting stuff. He says the difference between a Jewish and a non-Jewish person stems from the common expression, let us differentiate. We have a case of let us differentiate between totally different species. This is what needs to be said about the body. The body of a Jewish person is of a totally different quality from the body of members of all nations of the world. The Jewish body looks as if it were in substance similar to bodies of non-Jews. The bodies look similar, but only seem to be similar in material substance, outward look, and superficial quality. The difference of the inner quality, however, is so great that the bodies should be considered as completely different species. Two contrary types of soul exist: a non-Jewish soul comes from 3 satanic spheres, while the Jewish soul stems from holiness. Considering the general difference between Jews and non-Jews, a Jew was not created as a means for some other purpose. He himself is the purpose, since the substance of all divine emanations was created only to serve Jews. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, says Genesis. This means that the heavens and the earth were created for the sake of Jews, who are called the beginning. This means everything, all developments, all discoveries, the creation, including the heavens and the earth, are vanity compared to the Jews. The important thing are the Jews because they do not exist for any other aim. They themselves are the divine aim. So I don't think there's anything that can be more racist or ethnocentric than that. But this is, again, from one of the most significant Jewish religious figures of the 20th century, Rabbi Schneerson, whose students might be in the audience as we speak. So this is the worldview of Judaism. And again, I'll continue my presentation after the Maghrib prayer, but consider the whole purpose of this. That this kind of scrutiny has been on Islamic texts, on the Quran, on statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on hadith, on books of fiqh. This type of scrutiny, line by line, basically combing through the Islamic tradition to find anything that is controversial or sounds bad to a modern ear. They have highlighted this. Many Zionist groups have brought this to the fore. Why? To demonize Muslims, to make Muslims look like terrorists, to make Muslims look like violent, barbaric people in order to justify the invasion of Iraq, the invasion and continued occupation of Afghanistan, the continual blockade of Gazans in the Gaza Strip, the continued terroristic actions against Palestinians in the West Bank, the genocidal behavior of the IDF. All of these are justified by saying, oh, but look at what Islam teaches. They have jihad, in their religion. I'm perfectly happy, in fact, this is what I've been doing for over 10 years, to defend the teachings of Islam and say, yes, we have jihad in Islam, but what does it actually mean? What is jihad? Does it mean killing civilians? Does it mean, attacking women and children? No, that's not what it means. This is what jihad means, and here's the proof. And Muslims have that duty. Muslims have that duty to explain and clarify. But where is the counterpart? Where is the analysis? Where's the awareness of these texts in Judaism? Where do we see these passages being cited in the mainstream? I was in college when the beginning of the War on Terror happened. Back in those days, you had Fox News and you had commentators like Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly could cite you verses of the Quran like that. He could say, oh, kill them wherever you find them. Isn't that what your holy book says? They can cite these kinds of passages completely divorced from context and completely butchered and misinterpreted. But they were at least aware of that, and they spread that awareness to millions of people through their very popular television programs. Where was the counterpart to that? Where were the Talmudic passages cited? Where was the Torah passages cited? We haven't had that. So we have a lot of catching up to do to spread awareness. And I know, I'm not going to do the same thing that the Zionists did to Muslims, because the Zionists didn't caveat anything. They didn't put a disclaimer and say that, no, Muslims are, denounce terrorism. Muslims are not terrorists. They didn't put those disclaimers. But at least I will say that I know that many Jews disagree with these passages, and they would condemn Maimonides, they would condemn the Talmud, no problem. And they also condemn the kind of racial supremacy and the culture that is imbued in these passages. So I'm not trying to paint all Jews with one brush to say that all Jews endorse this kind of racism and racial superiority, because I know it's not true. There are many brave Jews actually right now who are fighting against the genocide of Palestinians. And I consider those Jews to be very brave because they're going against their own people. They're going against their own people for the sake of what's right, for the sake of justice. So I am very appreciative of those Jews. And I'm happy to name them people like Norman Finkelstein, people like Glenn Greenwald, people like Aaron Mattei, Max Blumenthal, who has done amazing reporting to debunk some of the atrocity propaganda and claims against Palestinians that we'll get into right after we finish our prayer, inshallah. Okay, so please come back for the rest of the presentation and then Q&A.
David.
I'm honestly just here to like see what's happening. Yeah.
There's just not enough time to go through all of it. You know, maybe you should ask the college here to teach this kind of class and bring these kinds of texts up in class in the same way that they have classes that scrutinize Islam and bring Islamic texts. Also, I want to make it very clear that the things that I'm showing you and presenting to you, I make sure are very well represented within the Jewish tradition. So I do the academic background work, and the things I'm claiming, actually, a lot of them, it's not like I've read the Talmud cover to cover. It's other academic works that have cited these passages, except they've put it, buried on page 50 where no one's going to see it. I'm just bringing it out so that people can actually be more aware. So another category, other than racial supremacism, anti-black and anti-Arab racism that we find in the Talmud, we also find these bizarre accounts of atrocities that are claimed Jews have suffered historically. And the question is, it's when you have a religion or a culture that tells you to hate others, it's usually not enough to inspire hate. If you just tell your children, hate this group of people, it's usually not enough to inspire hate. You usually will have to put some kind of frame on that to say that, these people committed atrocities against us. These people in the past committed all kinds of atrocities, and we have to hate them in return. We have to hate them and take out our revenge in return. That's the sociology of hatred. And this is what we find also in the Jewish texts. It's not sufficient just to assert that other groups should be hated. There needs to be a reason for the hate. And Judaism teaches Jews that non-Jews have viciously persecuted and slaughtered Jews for no reason throughout history. Jews are commanded to remember these evil historical deeds done by non-Jews, and they are to regularly commemorate this through Jewish holidays like Purim and Hanukkah. This concept of remembering what has been done to you comes actually from the Bible. It comes from the Torah, what's known as Amalek or the Amalekites. And in Deuteronomy chapter 25, we read, "Remember what Amalek did to you, this people known as Amalek, on your journey out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and struck down all who lagged behind you. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies on every hand in the land that your Lord God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget." So Amalek is this group that is purported to have committed atrocities against the Jewish nation. And God is saying, do not forget what they've done, and you shall blot them out. Basically, you should genocide them, completely wipe them out. And other passages within Deuteronomy, Numbers, 1 Samuel also explain the nature of the genocide. Kill women, children, infants, even their livestock. So Amalek, the Mishnah Torah, which again is coming from Maimonides, the most authoritative legal scholar of Judaism, he says that in his passage that Jews are commanded to always remember the Amalekites as to preserve hatred of them in their hearts. So to quote, "Similarly, it is a positive commandment to destroy the memory of Amalek, as Deuteronomy chapter 25 states, obliterate their memory. It's also a positive commandment to constantly remember their evil deeds and their ambush of Israel, to arouse our hatred of them." So this is explicit. We want to arouse hatred. Remember what Amalek did to you. The oral tradition teaches, remember with your mouths, do not forget in your hearts, for it is forbidden to forget our hatred and enmity for them. Now, what is significant about this type of genocidal hatred towards Amalek is that Israeli politicians are constantly invoking Amalek, and they're constantly labeling the Palestinians as Amalek. And even Netanyahu, in the course of this war, has on a couple of occasions referred to the Palestinians as Amalek. Remember what Amalek has done to you. And many other Israeli politicians have cited this as well, and that's why in the International Court of Justice, the lawyers who were claiming that Israel is committing a genocide cited dozens of Israeli lawmakers and politicians who are calling Palestinians Amalek. They're using this term specifically, deliberately, to invoke hatred, to arouse hatred, genocidal hatred and bloodlust against the Palestinians. So then what do we read in the Talmud? So this idea that we have suffered these atrocities and therefore we're justified in our hate and we're justified in genocidal violence in retaliation. Even though Palestinians have nothing to do with this Amalek that the Bible mentions from thousands of years ago. What's the connection? But within the Jewish tradition, people who are the enemies of Jews are labeled as Amalek, and they deserve the same kind of hatred and the same kind of genocidal treatment, killing of men, women, and children, and infants. So then in the Talmud, along this same theme of atrocity propaganda, it reads, with regard to the Babylonian exile following the destruction of the first temple, an old man from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem related to me, in this valley that lies before you, Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, killed 211,000 people, and in Jerusalem itself he killed 94,000 people on one stone until the blood of his victims flowed and touched the blood of Zechariah, etc. So on one stone, 94,000 people killed. Does that match with the demographics of Jerusalem at that time? God knows best. Seems to stretch our credibility. But then we read more. Apropos its discussion of the destruction of the temple and the calamities that befell Israel, the Gemara cites the verse, the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau, which the sages expounded as follows. The voice, this is the cry stirred up by the Emperor Hadrian, who caused the Jewish people to cry out when he killed 600,000 on 600,000 in Alexandria of Egypt. So are these numbers accurate? Is this a major exaggeration? Then in another passage of Gittin in the Talmud, the voice of Jacob, this is the cry aroused by the Emperor Vespasian, who killed 4 million people in the city of Beitar, and some say he killed 40 million people. So 40 million people, 40 million Jews are being killed by, in one city basically, by Vespasian. Is this true? But that we're just getting started. There were 400 synagogues in the city of Beitar, and in each and every one of them were 400 school teachers, and each and every one of these teachers had 400 school children, and when the enemy entered there, these school children stabbed them with their pens, and when the enemy prevailed and caught them, they wrapped the children in their scrolls and lit them on fire. So how many school children is this? Well, there's 400 synagogues, with each one having 400 school teachers, and each of the teachers having 400 school children. So that's 64 million school children being claimed were wrapped in scrolls and lit on fire. So this is like, a genocide that the world has never seen. It's basically more people than were in that part of the world in total. But this is the kind of horrific atrocity that the Talmud claims has happened to the Jews. And if you teach this to your population, to your society, to your children, you have them learn these passages, you're teaching them in your yeshivas, then you get this kind of mindset that the world is out to kill us, the world is out to genocide us, and we're justified in perpetrating all kinds of war crimes and atrocities on others. So within this recent conflict, we've seen this kind of atrocity propaganda, just exaggerated claims that have no basis in reality. The claim that we heard in October was that Hamas has beheaded 40 babies. They're so brutal and terroristic that they have no mercy even for Jewish babies. They beheaded 40 of them. This was the claim that reached the President of the United States. But it's come out and it's been definitively proven as to be completely false, a fabrication, something that was just invented for the purpose of demonizing Palestinians and justifying the brutal carpet bombing of Gaza. The other claim, Hamas has weaponized sexual assault and engaged in mass rape. There's mass rape against Israelis by the Palestinian terrorists. This was the claim. Mass rape. Reality? False. It's been completely debunked as a hoax. Completely debunked, and we'll get into the details of that. Hamas stabbed pregnant women and murdered babies in the womb. This is the claim. Again, completely false. There's no record, and the Israeli Ministry of Health and other authorities within Israel, they have not confirmed any pregnant woman was killed on October 7th. So this is completely made up. No pregnant women were killed in the Nova Music Festival, and no pregnant woman was killed in any of the kibbutzim. So this was complete. Even though it was blasted on all the headlines, it was repeated by all of the talking heads on social media and on TV, but it turned out to be propaganda, just to incite hatred of Palestinians. So the New York Post, advertising, Hamas kills 40 babies and children, beheading them. Look at these monsters. But it was debunked. Joe Biden keeps repeating his false claim that he saw pictures of beheaded babies. So the President of the United States is saying, I saw these pictures. Say, what pictures? There are no pictures. There's no pictures of this. There are no reports of this. It is completely fabricated. Completely fabricated by Israel and its foreign ministry. Israel's assault forced a nurse to leave babies behind. They were found decomposing. So when we see we hear about Palestinians committing atrocities against Israelis, the reality often is that those same atrocities are really being committed by the IDF or by Israel against Palestinians. How many Palestinian babies have been killed, murdered, because Israel is bombing hospitals? Israel is cutting the power to Gaza, cutting the power to hospitals, even bombing their generators so they can't have backup electricity. These were premature babies in the nursery who had to be abandoned because the IDF was bombing the hospital. So they're in the crib, babies decomposing. Can you imagine the horror? This is the worst kind of nightmare that Israel is afflicting on the world, on Palestinians. So how about this claim of mass rape? There was a big report in the New York Times, Screams Without Words was the title of it. And it described how Hamas weaponized sexual assault. Since that was published, and basically it created this wave of genocidal hatred amongst Jews, not only in Israel, but in the West, the story has been completely debunked. It's been completely debunked as being atrocity propaganda. And The Intercept, just today, a major investigative journalistic outlet, published its critique of the New York Times and said this is major journalistic malpractice. This is completely unacceptable, and multiple standards of the New York Times itself has been violated in publishing this essentially propaganda. So it's been completely debunked, and what the Intercept did was it took interviews from the main writer of this article, the reporter Annette Schwartz. Annette Schwartz, it turns out, is not a journalist. She's connected to Israeli intelligence, and her main line of work is propaganda. She's not a reporter, so how's the New York Times bringing her to lead this investigation of Hamas mass rape? This doesn't seem unbiased, so that's one violation of journalistic credibility. Then this Annette Schwartz is going on podcasts in Israel, talking in Hebrew about her investigation. And so what the Intercept did is it translated her discussions. And in her discussions, she admits that I went to all of these rape clinics. I went to the health ministry and I asked, where are the reports of the rapes that happened on October 7th? And all of these clinics told me there were no rapes. We have no record of that. There's no one who came to us and claimed that they were raped. So the Intercept quotes her, "First thing I called them all of these facilities, 11 Israeli hospitals that examine and treat potential victims of sexual violence, including rape, and they told me no complaint of sexual assault was received. I had a lot of interviews which didn't lead anywhere. I would go to all kinds of psychiatric hospitals, sit in front of the staff. All of them are fully committed to the mission, and no one had met a victim of sexual assault." She admits this in Hebrew in these interviews in Israel. But to an American audience, in English, the New York Times is publishing her report that there was mass rape. So what is the evidence? What is the evidence of this mass rape? It does not exist. It's just based on literally 2 quote-unquote eyewitness reports. And the only forensic evidence that they had was there was a lady at the Nova Festival, music festival, whose body was found and she wasn't wearing underwear. They claimed that this means she was raped. That's the only forensic evidence that there is. And her relatives, the relatives of this woman, and even her husband, questioned the New York Times and questioned the report and say, "We were manipulated. We don't believe she was raped. We, the family, don't believe she was raped. We were manipulated by the New York Times to make it seem like we agree with this narrative." And they've come out and publicly said this as well. So the whole thing is a fabrication. And she goes on, and I won't go through all of it with you. So even the Times of Israel reported this about a month within the war and admitted that there's no evidence of rape. Amid war and urgent need to ID bodies, evidence of Hamas's October 7 rapes slips away. Oh, it slipped away, the evidence. Despite definitive witness testimony, okay, they say definitive, global skepticism persists about the terrorist sexual crimes. Times of Israel investigates how a mass casualty event in a war zone made forensic determination impossible. So saying it's impossible, we can't have any evidence of this mass rape. Hamas engaged in mass rapes. And there's global skepticism. Wait, how is Hamas engaging in mass rape when they're also trying to kill everyone, but they're also trying to take hostages, and the IDF is firing Hellfire missiles from the Apache helicopters that are raining down on them, and the tanks are firing at the kibbutzim? Like, how are these rapes happening exactly? Show us the timeline, show us evidence. It doesn't really make sense. So the entire mass rape story has completely fallen apart and been debunked. And then similarly, there's these accusations that are made against Palestinians, but the truth is that the IDF has been raping, Israel has been raping not only other IDF soldiers, but also Palestinians. And here is just a small sample of headlines of the soldier kills herself after reporting she was raped. Now Israeli Army probes suspicions of negligence. Female IDF soldiers were pimped out to terror inmates. IDF officer charged with sexual assault of 3 female subordinates. 3 Israeli soldiers charged with raping, sodomizing female comrade. Israeli soldiers accused of raping 11-year-old. IDF colonel rabbi implies that rape is permitted in war. Many statements coming from rabbis that rape is permitted in war. And these rabbis aren't just making stuff up. This is found within the legal text of Judaism. I didn't go into that for this presentation, but you look at the Mishnah Torah again from Maimonides. He says, yeah, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly allowed for a soldier when you're fighting Amalek to rape a woman or a girl, and then when you're done, just kill her. There's no problem with that. That's allowed according to Jewish law. IDF soldiers rape in prison, only tip of iceberg, says state comptroller. Israeli suspects to plead to charges of raping of a British woman after defense lawyers get involved. 17 soldiers investigate in rape case. Israeli guards rape Palestinian women, on and on and on. The presentation, and it's right now we're at a crucial moment where decades of Hasbara, Israeli propaganda, are being blown out of the water, basically, as complete lies, complete propaganda. And we have to seize of this moment to question and to look deeper into these texts. What does Judaism actually teach? And I think it is necessary for Jews who do not agree with this racism, they do not agree with this racial supremacy, to be honest and to hold your institutions accountable, hold your rabbis accountable. How is this acceptable? How can you not denounce this? This is radicalism, this is endorsement of terrorism, this is endorsement of rape. There needs to be that kind of accountability. And for the rest of us, we have to keep pointing out these passages within the Jewish religious text, because it's a critical component of the fight for Palestinians. A lot of the commentary that comes, people defending Palestine, criticizing the IDF and its genocide, that's all good. But where is the religious component? You have to tie it back to the religion, because that answers the question. It answers the question of why this kind of behavior we're seeing in 4K from Israelis, and it's being cheerleaded by Zionists throughout the world. What is the cause of that? And it comes from religious teachings that affect the culture, and the culture affects individual Jews. So this is a necessary conversation that has to happen. I hope that this has generated some thought for everyone. I hope I can answer your questions, inshallah, in the Q&A. So I guess we can just make dua before we continue. And again, the whole speech was my thoughts, my own research. I don't speak for the MSA or the Muslim students on campus, and I definitely don't speak for the university, if anyone thought that I was speaking on behalf of the university. And, again, I want to have a conversation. I originally wanted to have a conversation with Jews, could have had like an equal platform to discuss these passages, but they rejected it. They refused that. So that's unfortunate, but we can continue maybe the discussion in the Q&A. Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So we're going to make a dua now. Oh Allah, we turn to you alone and beseech you alone, Ya Rabb. Aid the Palestinians and give them full victory. Forgive those who have died and elevate them to Jannat al-Firdaus, Ya Rabb. Forgive and elevate their families, Ya Rabb. Bring relief, bring comfort to the Palestinian children. Bring relief, bring comfort to the Palestinian mothers, the Palestinian fathers, Ya Rabb. Bring them relief, bring them comfort. Protect them from every harm and from every evil, Ya Rabb. Eradicate the starvation of the Palestinians and all oppressed people around the world, Ya Rabb. Protect all the children around the world, Ya Rabb. Protect them from genocide, Ya Rabb. Protect them from bombing. Protect them from bullets. Protect them from starvation. Protect them from every harm, Ya Rabb. Protect their mothers. Protect their fathers. Protect their family, Ya Rabb. We call on you alone, without partner, Ya Allah. Wrap them in your mercy. Wrap them in your love, Ya Rabb. Destroy the occupation, Ya Rabb. Destroy the oppressors, Ya Rabb. Destroy those perpetrating genocide, Ya Rabb. Destroy the genocide apologists, Ya Rabb. Destroy the genocide enablers. Destroy and punish those who are cheering and laughing about starving Palestinian children, Ya Rabb. Punish them in the deepest parts of your eternal fire, Ya Rabb. Protect us from the evil plots of your enemies, Ya Rabb. Protect us from the evil plots of your enemies, Ya Rabb, and turn their plots against them. Give us the strength to stand for justice, Ya Rabb, to fight against dhulm and oppression, Ya Rabb. Give us the tawfiq to defend the deen and to establish this deen firmly on earth, Ya Rabb. Forgive us our shortcomings, forgive us our shortcomings, forgive us, Ya Rabb, and guide us to the straight path. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. How should we do Q&A? You don't want to give them the mic so we can hear? Yeah, give them a mic so we can hear the question. And was there a camera that was supposed to be on
Assalamu alaikum. I have a comment and a question. So my comment is also, the Israeli army have been caught doing something called the Hannibal Directive. If anyone knows what that is, basically, to basically prevent the Palestinian military from doing a prisoner exchange. They kill their own people. I don't know why, maybe because they suck at aiming, whatever the situation is. So there won't be a prisoner exchange. And also, Israel killed their own hostages in Gaza, and they're blaming it on the Palestinians, and there's a lot of pressure from the Israeli public to do a prisoner exchange. And this isn't the first time we're seeing this propaganda. We saw this in 1948 with the genocide in the Nakba, in 1967, so on and so forth, where the Israeli military, they get away with crimes. And this is the first time in 2024, because we have cameras, because of TikTok, that they're getting exposed. So my question to you is the following. People call the Palestinians terrorists, and they say, we just want to kill Jews. They just wake up one day and want to kill Jews. The world has tried to hold Israel accountable. Do you think the only way to hold Israel accountable, and I say this with no shame, is if the Palestinian military, or if the Muslim world gives a military defeat to Israel? Because Israel, the ICJ, we tried that, did not work. The boycotting is barely working. They're still doing the genocide. So do you think the only way is through military means? Because that's the only way Israel learns.
The way that the United States has tried to pressure states to obey international law, quote unquote, is applied selectively. They have different methods. They have a carrot and a stick. The carrot is you offer money, you bribe officials, you offer IMF loans, and that way you try to get foreign countries to obey the law, basically, or obey your will, or to follow your interests. That's the carrot. The stick is you put sanctions, you get the UN involved for a coalition to invade, you get NATO to involved to bomb. This is how the US has kept the entire world in submission for decades now, for over a century, you could even say. Definitely since World War II. So Israel has flouted all international law. They have flouted all standards of basic human decency. They have committed war crime after war crime shamelessly. They don't respond to any kind of sanction if other countries put sanctions, like taking out their diplomatic relations, etc. So if it comes to war, like this is something that maybe is the only thing that Israel is going to understand. If surrounding countries, if they wake up one day and they realize that Israel's plan is not just to wipe out Palestinians, they have other regional interests when it comes to the Golan Heights, for example, when it comes to the Sinai Peninsula, when it comes to other areas of the Middle East. If there needs to be a military intervention, then inshallah that will happen. That's what we want. That's, to make it very clear, that's what we want. You have to give the mic. And I don't know how sisters are going to do.
Maybe one there, one here.
Yeah, so sisters, if you have a question, is there a mic? Yeah.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much. I was expecting to be shocked, appalled, and disappointed, and I wasn't. So I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate the documentation. I learned a lot that I didn't know. It was kind of, I have to do some soul searching. So I very much appreciate that, in this world where there are no more facts, at least we can agree on the facts here. So I appreciate that. I checked all the references while you were talking, and yes, they're there. So I wanted to thank you for that, for sticking to the facts, for opening my eyes to this side of things that I didn't see. Here's my question. So you mentioned very nicely that there were no mass rapes, and that's true. I mean, I think I've seen that also, some publications about that there is at least a question mark. My question is, do you acknowledge that there were killings by Hamas on October 7? What is your take on October 7? So I know you're focusing on the other side, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about October 7. What is your, what are the facts as far as you're concerned with regards to killings, not rapes, but killings?
Thank you for your question. I didn't really clarify in my presentation the exact facts and background of October 7th. October 7th was a reaction. October 7th was Palestinians realizing that the noose is tightening around our necks, basically. Since 2007, Israel has blockaded the Gaza Strip, which means that they control anyone who comes in and out of the Gaza Strip. They control all the aid, the medicine, the food, the water, the electricity that gets into the Gaza Strip. And they've slowly been basically tightening the noose, reducing the amount of food and aid and medicine that goes into the Gaza Strip, the amount of electricity, even water, clean drinking water was not available to 97% of the Gaza Strip, and 50% of the population in Gaza is under 18 years old. So we're talking about minors and children. So they are being basically starved to death, and the time is ticking down because of Saudi Arabia. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is about to normalize with Israel. And none of that normalization involves putting pressure on Israel to give Palestinians a state or to guarantee that Palestinians have basic rights. So the Palestinians calculated, and this is my, I don't have any insider information. This is just what I'm gathering from all the facts that I've read. The Palestinians decided that now is the time to act, now or never. We have to break out of this concentration camp, and we have to secure some kind of leverage. Because we have zero leverage, the international community has turned their back on us. They tried peaceful protest in 2019, protesting at the border. Basically, Israel created this 220-foot wall to keep them in their cage, the concentration camp. They protested that peacefully. IDF snipers at the wall sniped and killed over 200 Palestinians protesting. This is the shocking brutality. So they've tried peaceful protest, they've tried all kinds of international pressure. They're being starved to death. So they break out. Their plan is to take hostages as leverage so that they can gain some kind of semblance of a future and not be ethnically cleansed or genocided. That was the plan. Obviously there was killing that was done, but it's killing in context of war. Two sides of a war, and no one disagrees that people get killed in war. The casualty numbers shifted quite a bit in October 7th and the weeks thereafter. And they started out with the claim that 1,400 Israelis were murdered by Hamas, but that figure changed. It went to 1,200. Some estimates are even lower of the total casualty count. And the forensic evidence actually showed that Israel had targeted its own civilians in the Nova Music Festival. And this international groups have called this out. Witnesses, participants of the Nova Music Festival and at the kibbutzim also said that there was Israeli tanks and Israeli helicopters that were firing on the attendees of the music festival running away. And Israel announced that it was bearing all the evidence. So you have these images of cars that have been completely charred to a crisp. And people were pointing out that, well, none of the weapons that the Palestinians had could cause this kind of damage, this mass destruction. This is the damage done by, highly explosive Hellfire missiles. And witnesses are seeing these helicopters launching at the civilians. And reports came officially from the IDF that, yes, we did fire towards civilians. So how many of the total death count was from Palestinian fighters, basically carrying AK-47s, and how much of that casualty count was from the IDF itself? I submit that a large percentage was from the IDF. It doesn't make sense for the Hamas operation to just kill as many people as possible if your goal is to take as many hostages as possible. It doesn't make sense to have both of those goals. So I think that's the reality. Now, if Hamas did kill women and children, I can completely condemn that. If they did that, but when you ask or you see, the